Sometimes you gotta close the door to open a window.
Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to Kaikona's podcast. Today our guest is Dr. Sarah McKay. In fact, I could say our first guest, which has its reasons. I remember in some of your interviews, Sarah, you've been mentioning that how you got inspired by Oliver Sacks and dived into neuroscience. For me, you are that person who got me interested in
Gosh.
brain science. And for me, like you're a woman scientist with a vision that empowered me, a girl in small country, Georgia. And I'm sure lots of others around the world, like to simply do more and see more. And thank you for that.
Wow, that's very humbling to hear. So thank you.
And thank you. And the topic of this podcast today is neuroscience of napping. And in your famous talk you gave for the TED, you talk this like 20 minutes of bliss and oblivion, which is kind of boost of creativity and improves memory. And I would like to tell us like, what is the nap and what benefits does afternoon nap have?
Yeah, that's thank you for asking. It's one of my favorite things. I suppose I was always one of those people who got to about sort of 2:30 in the afternoon, and that will probably happen to me today. And just it's where I am right now in Sydney, Australia. It's 1:15 in the afternoon, so I've still got another hour in me. But I would always get to the middle of the afternoon and feel like I was fighting off this absolute biological urge to want to fall asleep. And particularly when it was a little bit different, I guess, through my school years, because the school day finished at 3. So I was there was a bit of a change of scene. It would be the end of the school day and I would go home, and it wasn't really an issue. Once I got into university, it was a little bit different, and I'd find myself in lectures kind of somewhere between sort of 1, 2, 3 in the afternoon, just desperate to fall asleep, and I'd spend an hour or two really fighting that urge. And it was only as I got a little bit older, I thought, well, what's as a student, really what's stopping me from sleeping right now in the day if I haven't got a lecture on or anywhere else to be. And I suppose as I got a bit older and then I moved out of academic research and I built my own business and I worked from home, I realised, well, there's absolutely no one I need to ask permission from anymore. I can have that nap. And over time, I sort of started experimenting with the amount of time. In the early days, I would make the mistake of falling asleep and sleeping for 2 hours. I'd fall asleep at 2 and wake up at 4 and the afternoon was gone. And started sort of delving into the research a little bit as I became more interested, I suppose, in the application of neuroscience to everyday life, and realized that there were a couple of key strategies I needed to employ to make my afternoon naps more effective. And they were very much based in our neurobiology. So overall, the message is, if you're going to have an afternoon nap, if you have the urge, if you have the desire to have a nap, and you can do it safely, you're not a bus driver or an airline pilot or a school teacher, you've got something to do. If you have that urge, there's a biological reason for that. I'll get into that in a moment. So long as you don't nap for longer than half an hour at a time, it's not going to disrupt your sleep later at night. And that was the first mistake I suppose I made, was that I would fall asleep at 2 in the afternoon and I'd wake up 2 or 3 hours later feeling groggy, feeling tired. I'd wasted the afternoon and then I couldn't get to sleep that night. So one of the absolute keys that anyone really needs to know, and they don't really need to know much else about naps, is if you're going to have an afternoon nap, if you feel a desire, you've got to set an alarm so that you wake up within half an hour. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The primary reason is you don't want to fall into deep sleep. So when we fall asleep, there's lots of different stages of sleep. We kind of, go down into deeper and deeper and deeper stages of sleep. When we fall asleep at night for many, many hours, we go into the very early stages of sleep, a deep wave sleep. That's a very deep restorative sleep, and we can spend an hour or two in that sleep. We fall asleep in the afternoon and sleep for longer than half an hour. We fall into deep sleep. One, it is very hard to wake up out of deep sleep. And when you are woken up out of deep sleep, you feel terrible, you feel groggy. And two, once you have started the process of deep sleep, it then disrupts your sleep patterns for the rest of the day or the evening. But if you start falling asleep, you sleep for half an hour, you don't reach deep sleep, you gain all of the benefits from having had a nap without the risks, without feeling groggy, without disrupting your nighttime sleep, and you just feel a whole lot better. You don't feel sleepy. So some of the benefits, which you mentioned, in terms of what people may notice about themselves, is, well, one, you've lost the urge to sleep. Even if you only sleep for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, what you've done is you have almost sort of stopped that overwhelming desire, that overwhelming need to sleep. There's that. I'll get into the biology of that, as I said. The second is, we know that it improves memory and learning. So if you have been working on some kind of learning task in the morning, perhaps you're a student, you've read something, or whatever it is that you have been learning or working on that morning, you improve your memory, because we know sleep consolidates memory, and even a short nap starts that process of memory consolidation. So many studies have been done looking at people's memories, including an afternoon nap, and we find it improves it. The second is, it can also be used to sort of smooth away those rough emotional edges. When that sleep drive builds and builds and builds, and we have that urge to sleep and we can't, we just feel cranky and angry and grumpy and out of sorts, we start to lose a little bit of emotional regulation. And that's a really important thing to be able to do. So when we have a short nap, we kind of build back in that emotional regulation. And then the third is that we know it enhances creativity. It's one kind of default way in which we can take our thinking brains that are always thinking and focusing and paying attention and thinking about what's going around, and kind of switch that off and just let our sort of subconscious mind, our default mode network, in a way, sort of work away on various problems. And a lot of the great thinkers and creative minds use it, the inventors and the historians and the great philosophers of the past used, one, afternoon naps as a way of generating creative insights, and two, walking in nature as a way of deep thinking and also problem solving and creative insights. So the benefits of a short afternoon nap are therefore threefold. One is it improves memory. Two, it improves emotional regulation. And three, it improves creativity.
This default mode network, like all those three reasons, like I remember from the university years, like when I got naps, like how I felt. And before that, I didn't know like background of the science. And after your courses, dig into deep. And napping is really crucial for the brain and for better functioning. And we don't have a culture of napping in Georgia. And when I moved in China, I remember like where most people nap after lunch about an hour. I like changed my habits, and after living there, realized how important is it for the health. And in most cultures, even in Georgia, nap is considered either it's a luxury, like you have a lot of time, or it is considered as you are like lazy person. And I always had this question in my mind, that why do we feel this shame to rest our body and mind?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's hard to comment on why different cultures have developed these different attitudes to napping. And like you say, there are some countries and cultures in the world, China, for example, and lots of Asian countries, and also a lot of the Mediterranean European countries similarly have a culture of a siesta or an afternoon nap. And it's not seen as wasting time. It's not seen as laziness. It's seen as part of, you know, a whole healthy lifestyle. It's recognized what the benefits of that are, how it can fulfill you and, fill your well-being cup, make you a whole lot, healthier and more able to deal with what life throws at you. As a neuroscientist, I can't really comment on where a lot of these different cultural ideals have come from, apart from saying that the neuroscience is firmly in favor of the countries and the cultures that support napping, because the benefits far outweigh any of the risks. And you can get all of the benefits, as I say, from having a 20-minute nap. You don't need to have an hour. You can have a 20-minute nap lying under your desk or wherever. I think it's also important to kind of wind back a little bit and just discuss a little bit of the neurobiology as to why some people have that desire to nap. It doesn't happen in everyone. But what we do have is a 24-hour circadian rhythm, circadian clock built into every cell in our body. It's a genetic clock. And it reflects the fact that the planet Earth that we evolved on, spins on its axis in 24 hours. So humans are biologically programmed to fit into a 24-hour night and day cycle. What we do see in many people is that there is this biological urge to nap in the middle of the afternoon, and it's quite natural and it's quite normal. It has nothing to do with whether you had carbohydrates at lunchtime. It has nothing to do with whether you slept well the night before, whether you're sick, whether you're lazy, anything like that. What it is solely to do with is what we call rising sleep drive. So if we zoom all the way into the brain and we take a look at a lot of the biochemical messages and chemicals that the brain uses to communicate, what we often see are biochemical messages or molecules, and they always have to latch on to a receptor, like a lock and a key. So the molecule's like a key and the receptor's like a lock, and you won't get the message carrying on unless you get that kind of action happening. Now, as you go through your day, as you kind of move through the waking day, what we see is a particular receptor called an adenosine receptor gets filled up, and there'll be millions of these within the brain, and they get filled up with adenosine. And the more and more and more and more receptors that get filled with adenosine, the more and more and more and more you have an urge to sleep. And that sleep drive kind of builds up during the day and at the same time as our circadian rhythm. But what we see in many people is that urge kind of does start to rise quite steeply in the early to middle of the afternoon. So there's actually a biological reason that your adenosine receptors are filling up, and the urge to sleep isn't laziness, it's a biological drive. Now, one of the best, quickest ways to kind of knock the adenosine out of the receptor is to have a nap. And you can get that effect of clearing the receptors out within about 20 minutes of being asleep. So you only need a 20-minute nap to clear them out and to reduce the sleep drive back down. Then it will start rising again. And if your nap wasn't long, it will coincide with nighttime. There is another way that you can knock the adenosine receptors out, although it's not as effective as a nap, but that is using coffee or caffeine. And we know that caffeine latches onto the same receptor and it bumps the adenosine off. And so in a way, it stops that sleep drive rising as quickly. So you could have coffee or you could have a nap, but the nap's going to be more effective than the coffee just because it simply is. But some people do both. They have a cup of coffee and then they have the nap, and they've kind of got the dual benefit of the caffeine and the nap at the same time. So I think if people understood the biology, that it's a purely biological drive, and many people it starts rising at that point of the day, they would say it's not laziness. It's you are far better off spending 20 minutes managing the problem of the sleep drive and just kind of letting your body do what it wants to do than fighting it for 2 hours. Because if someone's fighting it for 2 hours, they're not going to be focused. They're not going to be effective. They're going to be grumpy. They're going to have 2 hours of working at 50% versus 20 minutes of nothing and then another hour and 40 minutes of 100%. So I think it's far more beneficial for people to understand the science, perhaps, as a way of starting to change attitudes.
Yeah, like the science of it, understanding helps people a lot to change their habit. And I was interested, you also, I remember, mentioned that it's kind of equal to the meditation, and people often try to meditate and they kind of forget this biological gift, what we have, which
yeah. People often ask the question, is napping the same as meditating? And most people know. I think most people, if they have the urge, that biological drive, the drive is to nap, the drive is not to meditate. So if you have the urge, what would be the point in setting aside 20 minutes to meditate when you could set aside 20 minutes to nap? But in some cultures, perhaps meditation is seen as more worthy than sleeping. But the point is, you need to address that urge when it occurs. You can't nap an hour before or an hour later. If you're going to meditate and sit there quietly and calmly, you're probably going to fall asleep if you have the urge. Your biology will overwhelm your breathing or whatnot. Maybe if you were a very skilled someone who meditates a lot or is very well practiced in the art of meditation. But for most people, you might as well sleep if you're going to meditate in that point in time anyway. It'll be far more beneficial to be sleeping.
Okay, thanks. And my other question is connected to the habits of napping. Like during the last decade, how sleep habits changed, especially napping culture have changed in big companies. If you have any examples in Australia or any in other countries.
Yeah, look, I think the global culture to work, how everyone's working in 2020 and 2021 has changed dramatically for everyone because of the pandemic. Most people who can are now working from home. So there's perhaps a very, very different attitude to that now, and those types of jobs, predominantly, computer-based, office-based, desk-based jobs. If people are working from home, they've got the perfect opportunity to be able to embed a 20-minute nap into their day. I think it's probably given people more space and time to be able to experiment with that. Obviously, if you're a doctor working in a hospital or you're a teacher in a school, you have a job which involves face-to-face interactions. It's not going to happen, but there are many, many people who it's perhaps given those opportunities to do that the last year or so. I don't feel I can remember what life was like in 2018 and 2019. Maybe kind of 5-8 years ago, there was a bit of a kind of a trend for a lot of these big global trendy cool companies. Google perhaps back in the day was a bit cooler than it is now, or Facebook, for having napping pods and for kind of, in a way, honouring the biology, honouring the understanding of the science that napping was really beneficial for people. I know my gym, the Virgin Gym that I go to in the city, there were napping pods there for people who had that urge and wanted to go and sleep in the middle of the day versus working out. So there certainly are some examples of that. I'm much more of a fan of the countries and the cultures where everyone does it and it's just accepted. You don't have to kind of engineer or design a pod for someone to do that. It's just seen as quite acceptable to lie down under your desk or lie back in the car or, log out of a Zoom call and go and have a quick nap on your sofa. I think that's a far more beneficial and natural way to be doing it. But that's just because I'm able to do that, perhaps, is my opinion.
The sleep and the napping as kind of very important for our mental and physical health. And but besides that, I think pandemic has changed a lot in it. Even for me, if I stay and work from home, because of the stress, it's hard. But according how environments that I have a couch nearby, so I can get a little bit of nap and feel recharged. But yet, an increasing number of people are getting less than they need. And today, we're living in a kind of chronically sleep-deprived society. And I can say that as first-time mom. My baby was born in July, and I've been noticed that this kind of 3 major reconstruction period in I would say in female mind, that infancy, when I look at my kid in adolescence and pregnancy, it is somehow connected this neurobiological urge of napping. And do you have any thoughts? Lots of sleeps are connected to those 3 stages in our life.
So what are the 3 stages? Can you ask?
Infancy, adolescence, and pregnancy. When you're really small.
Yeah,
and,
I guess Yeah, so and there's lots to kind of unpack that. I guess I want to say, just to kind of go back to what you said in the very beginning of that statement, you were talking about, you know, chronic sleep deprivation in our cultures, and I think that's perhaps a global phenomenon, not in my house, not me personally, because I'm a big fan of sleeping. And I should add that if afternoon naps are done strategically, then they don't disrupt your night's sleep. I have yet to meet a person who strategically naps during the day for a short strategic nap who has bad sleep at night. Typically, people who nap really enjoy sleeping, and they're very, very happy when they go to bed at night. They really enjoy falling asleep, and they sleep very well and very deeply. So there are a lot of strong positive psychological associations with sleep. What people fail to do in most Western and Eastern and, you know, global, like the society that we live in, is we fail to recognise that our circadian rhythms are modulated by the light and dark, by the rising and the setting of the sun. And when it's dark at night, we really need to be honouring that, not turning on all of our lights. We need to be focusing in on getting darkness as we prepare for bed. Part of the much of the sleep disruption that we see in adults is due to just too much artificial light, too much electrical light, particularly in the evenings. That's a really big problem. In terms of these phases of life that we kind of go through, I mean, an infant isn't distracted by Netflix, isn't distracted by scrolling through Facebook, isn't procrastinating doing other things. Babies have a biological, absolute fundamental need to sleep, and, you know, newborns can sleep as many hours a day as my dog, who's lying there on the floor. And we all know how important it is for little babies to be sleeping. It's absolutely fundamental for their normal, healthy growth and development. And they have that inbuilt mechanism, that inbuilt need in them. They don't need to ask to go to bed. They don't need to, you know, they haven't got all of the other things competing. That's kind of the main thing they do, apart from feeding. When you go through adolescence, that's a bit of a different sort of phase in life. And obviously there's a few more competing demands going on. You know, you might have an iPhone for the first time. You've got your friends, and you've got your homework, and you've got TV, and you're reading books. And there's all these different demands going on during adolescence. But a bit like infancy, it's a period of rapid growth, of rapid brain development, of rapid psychological change, of rapid body change and development and growth. And one of the most important things that we can do to honour that biological shift is to sleep. The problem is, as we go through adolescence, there are various hormonal changes that take place, and we see the maturation of some of the hormones which signal it is getting dark, it is time to sleep. And so again, the battle that many parents of adolescents have is, or maybe many parents don't realise, but the battle they should be having is to try and promote and encourage that respect for that nightfall, and dimming the lights, toning down the device use, and encouraging young people to sleep as many hours as they can. They do see a bit of a shift in terms of sleep drive, in terms of the recalibration of all of the hormones, in particular the release of melatonin, which signals to the body it's getting dark. So there are some complexities that teenagers are facing in terms of needing more sleep, but finding it hard to sleep at the right time, particularly when they have to get up early the next morning and go to school. I think one of the benefits that many children have experienced during the pandemic in 2020, especially teenagers, is that they have been able to sleep in. And so that has, you know, suited them in some ways. There's got to be some upsides to this whole world we live in. The third phase, which in which sleep is really important, is as you've mentioned, during pregnancy, although I think the early years of motherhood are probably more important. But pregnancy is a really interesting time, particularly the final stages of pregnancy, when a couple of things are happening which very easily disrupt your sleep. So one is the fact that you're really large and you're uncomfortable. You've got a great big belly with a wiggling baby inside. And as I say, it's often like having someone constantly cuddling you from the inside. You tend to run hot, body temperature's up. Your body temperature is up because of the hormone progesterone is up, and also because there is another whole human inside you that's also metabolizing and producing heat. So you're uncomfortable and you're hot. And we know that one of the signals which occurs, which helps us fall to sleep and stay asleep, as low as your body temperature going down. And your body temperature isn't able to drop as much in the late stages of pregnancy. So that's disrupting your sleep too. You might not notice it's disrupting your sleep, or you may be constantly waking at night. Perhaps the baby's pressing on your bladder and you need to go to the toilet as well. So there's lots of ways that pregnancy can disrupt your sleep, particularly in the later stages. So that's another phase. I think the early years of motherhood are also one of the times in which we most struggle with sleep deprivation. I know I did, and I think that if there was one thing that my mother said to me, I say to mothers now, and advice I try to take on myself, but I understand that it is hard, is go to bed early when you're a mum. Because if your baby is still feeding multiple times a night, maybe you put your baby to bed at 7 and the baby wakes for its first feed at 11 p.m. or midnight. If you've gone to sleep at 10, you're being woken up after 1 hour. Now, at the beginning of this call, we talked about how you go into this deep, deep phase of sleep within the first couple of hours of sleep. Getting woken up from deep sleep is really horrible. It doesn't feel good, and it's very, very disruptive. Whereas if you get woken up later in the night, if you've already had 4 hours of sleep, you might be just in the lighter stages of sleep. It's much easier to be woken up at 4 a.m. after you've already slept for 6 hours than it is to be woken up at 11 p.m. when you've only been asleep for an hour. So one mistake that new mums make, and I know how hard it is they put the baby down and then they stay up for another 2 or 3 hours because they want a bit of alone time. But the most important thing that you can do is put the baby down and then go to sleep yourself. Hopefully, if you've got other kids, your husband or your partner can work with you to look after them. I know that time by yourself is precious, but having a good chunk of sleep before the baby wakes you the first time is more precious and will enable you to be able to cope with all of the other things that new motherhood, that you're constantly fighting against. If you can get 3, 4, 5 hours sleep at the beginning of the night before the baby wakes you, all the better.
I'm going to take this advice because I do this exactly the same way, that when I let him sleep, I come out and work a little bit and then go at night. And I always feel this arduous sleep.
Yeah, because if you're getting woken in that first hour or so, it is just horrible to be woken up. Woken up at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. It's okay, really. It's not as
I love the quote. I love the quote you said, like hugging from inside. I've never looked at this way, and this is really inspiring metaphor. My next question would be like, how does daytime naps affect our long night sleep, and what is kind of best environment for napping, or is there?
Yeah, I suppose, as I said, I've already touched on this. Your daytime nap will not impact your nighttime sleep so long as you don't sleep for longer than half an hour. If you limit your daytime nap to 30 minutes, it should not impact your night's sleep. And in many cases, it will help your night's sleep be better because you are learning to enjoy sleep. You're learning to kind of give in and indulge that need and that desire to sleep. People can develop sleep issues, and part of it can be psychological, and that they go to bed and they think, oh, I'm going to go to sleep and I'm going to wake up, and they can't ever kind of wind down and just drift off into, like, as I say, that oblivion. Whereas if we do that, we kind of learn how to do that during the day in kind of short chunks of time, then we can do that more easily at night. And as I said, in my very informal survey of strategic afternoon nap people, they all tend to be, I have never met one who was not a good sleeper at night. They all tend to be, I say, well, do you sleep well at night? And they go, oh, of course I do. I've never met anyone who has said that they don't sleep. And these are people who have a system for sleeping in the afternoon, and they've worked it out, and they've got it down to kind of a fine art, so to speak. And really, it doesn't matter where you do it because it's a really short amount of time. It doesn't need to be quiet. I've napped in the car outside my children's school before pickup. I've napped at the cinema. I've napped, on the sofa. I've napped at the beach. I've napped, wherever I'm on a bench in the park. I don't really think it matters, but I also think it's not going to happen unless you really want to do it. I mean, I don't nap every day if I don't get the desire, if I don't get the urge. I don't need it that day, but on days that I do and on days that I can, I allow myself that time.
And one more question, which is kind of connected with the waking up. It's a big part of sleeping and napping. And I'm not really big fan of alarm clocks. And what I'm interested is there any research or if you have your insights, is either waking up slowly is more beneficial or waking up abruptly?
I think that an afternoon nap is different because you're going to have to set an alarm to wake yourself up before you drift into deep sleep. There's not really any other way around that one. In the morning, I wake up naturally. I don't wake up to an alarm. But as I say, I'm a very good sleeper, and I have all of my strategies and my systems worked out. I have my bedroom faces east, so I can see the sun kind of rising up, and I'm very lucky that I can see out to the ocean. And so I'm looking east in the mornings, and so I see the sun rise. And I go to bed. If I have a nap or not, I'm usually in bed by 9 at night. I read my book, I'm very happy, and I drift off to sleep, and I can normally sleep. I normally get about 8.5 hours sleep. And then I naturally wake up in the morning as the sky starts to brighten, as the sun sort of starts to come up. And one really useful thing to understand is that's great, because one of the things I do is I see the sun rise, and I see those oranges and those pinks. You can also see them at night when the sun goes down, and this happens everywhere in the world. This happens on doesn't matter where you live, the sun rises and the sun sets every day. And one of the ways that we can regulate that natural waking in the morning is to, manage us, make sure our room's cool and dark, we're not too hot. And also, but seeing those sunrises and those sunsets are another really strong signal that helps regulate that 24-hour cycle, that 24-hour rhythm. We have specific neurons in our eye, specific receptors in our eye, which pick up those color shifts, those oranges and those yellows and those pinks and those blues. And they are part of the signal that helps signal that light dark. So I can tell you personally from experience, it is far more pleasant to just wake up naturally as the sun comes up, and as your body then kind of gradually wakes up. And if I've already had 8 hours plus sleep, so I'm fine. It's a little bit different if I had gone to bed really late. I didn't sleep very soundly, and I woke up with an alarm, and I was waking up unnaturally. But sometimes people don't always get a choice to be able to do that. That's just kind of sometimes what happens. But I think largely most people don't go to bed early enough. I know that there's these ideas that there's night owls and morning larks. There's a biological mandate to honour the light-dark cycle, and you can argue against that and fight against that. But I tell you, if you are able to map your sleep onto nighttime and wake when the sun comes up, a lot of that friction is removed from the whole situation.
Yeah, I mean, during your course, I remember in Neuroscience Academy, my perspective has changed when you explained to us this foundational model of our brain, like the bottom up, outside in, and top down framework. Could you tell us more about, to our listeners, how it works and where napping belongs in this framework?
Yeah, sure. Well, neuroscience is really complex, and human beings are really complex. And to understand neuroscience and human behavior is just, we're not going to get anywhere unless we in some way break the complexity down into a framework that we can conceptualize, because we're trying to use our little human brains to understand human brains, and it's really complicated, and we're probably not smart enough to understand how our own brains work. So it's always really useful to have a structure or a framework to kind of conceptualize how complex things are. So I call this bottom up, outside and top down, because it kind of, as we say in Australia and New Zealand, it says what it is on the tin. It's very descriptive. You've got the brain in the middle, and the brain is in constant two-way communication with your bottom-up biology. So there's messages coming from your biology up, from your genes, from your hormones, from your immune system, You're constantly getting information in about your body temperature, about your sleep, about the food that you have eaten, about how you're moving and exercising your body. So your physical biological health is intimately connected with your brain. Your brain is simply one other part of your body, and it evolved to move your body through the world. It evolved to move your body through this outside world. And the outside world, the environment, other people that we interact with, previous life experiences we've had, the light-dark cycle, the rising and the setting of the sun, so I've been talking about, that's the outside world, and it gets into our brain as well. We see the world, we hear the world, we eat the world. When we eat food, we touch the world. We're constantly interacting with other humans. So the outside world gets into our brain, and we're in constant communication and receiving data from the outside world. And then the last piece of the top-down piece of this kind of three-part puzzle is a bit more kind of harder to kind of get your hands on, but these are things like your thoughts and your emotions and your expectations and your feelings. Now, these are generated by the brain, but they also physically influence the brain too. Constantly thinking a thought over and over again can restructure the shape. It sort of tunes and prunes the brain in a way. Now, our bottom-up biology, the outside-in world, and our top-down thoughts and feelings are all interacting, and this is all data kind of coming and going from our brain. So if we are to take any human behavior problem or concept that we're trying to understand from the perspective of neuroscience, I always say, well, let's put it in the middle. Let's put sleep in the middle. What can help promote a good night's sleep? What are some of the bottom-up signals? Well, there's, are we well nourished? Is our body temperature cool? Have we perhaps moved our body enough to tire ourselves out during the day? There's some bottom-up data feeding into sleep. What's the outside-in data? What's the most important one I've talked about? The light-dark cycle, the rising and setting of the sun. Or perhaps there's some external stressful event happening out there in the world that perhaps is increasing your stress levels. That's data coming in that might be influencing whether or not sleep is happening. And then thoughts and feelings. Perhaps you, like me, have developed a very strong positive association with sleep. I really like sleep, so the thought of it makes me happy. Or perhaps you've never slept well, and the thought of going to bed at night makes you feel stressed because you might not get to sleep. So that's going to be influencing sleep. So every kind of idea that we have that we think, how can neuroscience explain this, or how can we look at this through the lens of neuroscience? I always remind people it's going to be complex. There's going to be a lot of factors at play here. How can we kind of break these down into sort of three blocks or three pieces of the puzzle that we can conceptualize? And so that's why I said let's put the brain in the middle, bottom up, outside in, and top down.
And it really works, and it helps to kind of put things into
a very visual framework.
Visual,
well. Yeah.
Exactly. You mentioned like all these thoughts coming into our mind, and you also mentioned like default mode network. And could you tell us more like about how is it connected with creativity and with afternoon naps and those aha moments we get?
Yeah, well, the default mode network are pretty much the parts of the brain that are communicating with each other whenever our minds are wandering, when we're daydreaming, when we're problem solving, when we are imagining a conversation we may have with someone, or perhaps remembering a lovely memory or a scary memory from the past. These are the parts of the brain which are kind of telling ourselves the stories of our lives, that kind of voice inside our head. Now, we never really knew that there were specific brain networks involved in this type of communication until the advent of fMRI. So fMRI stands for functional magnetic resonance imaging. And it is, you may have seen the images of people, going into a brain scanning machine, and then we get all these rainbow images of the brain. Now, there are lots of problems and lots of downsides with brain imaging. We can't always look at an image of the brain in action and then go, well, that correlates with this behavior. And different research groups often come up with completely different results based on the same data. So it's at early stage neuroscience, let's say that. But for now, it's the best we've got. What researchers noticed when they first started using fMRI was they would put someone in the brain scanner and they'd turn the machine on, and the person would often be sitting there waiting for an instruction or waiting for a task to begin. Perhaps they were doing a maze learning task where they had a maze they had to navigate through visually. And when they weren't working on the maze, they were just lying there. Perhaps the researchers, did some data analysis. And they noticed whenever anyone was just lying there, not really doing anything, the same brain networks became activated and were more active than other brain networks. And then as soon as someone went back onto task, navigating through the maze, listening to instructions, perhaps reciting a list of memories, or perhaps working on a task, then the default mode network, that the storytelling self, switched off and they were back on task. And as soon as they went back from not paying attention, they just went back to sort of lying there, the default mode network would come back on. And so it was called the default mode network. It's those parts of the brain that are active when we are just, in our own head, telling ourselves stories. And it's where we solve problems, and it's where we have imaginary conversations, and it's where many people live out a lot of their lives and their own, there's lots of words for it, imagination, or your inner voice, or your inner self, or your, it's where creativity lies. It's just the regions of the brain that are involved with telling yourself a story. When you're not doing anything else. They're not on when you're concentrating on, you're doing a maths problem, or you're thinking about, am I too hot, or am I cold, or what do I need to make for dinner tonight? So that's where that part of the brain comes from. It's not mysterious, it's not magical. It's just the parts of the brain that become more active when you are in your own head.
We touched the creative part of ours. I'm interested also like how this napping changes the way we respond emotionally, the world around us, and connect with it.
Yeah, well, I'm not entirely sure we know how, but we know it does. Napping does help people with emotional regulation. So if we are to perhaps give someone you can ask, do a quiz, ask people to fill out a questionnaire on, do you feel like in control of your emotions, or do you feel like your emotions are running away with you? And if they are at 2 p.m. and they have a desire to nap, they might not feel very emotionally regulated. They may feel a bit flustered or a bit frazzled. Have a nap, and afterwards they feel much more in control emotionally. I'm not sure we know exactly why that is the case, but we do know that that's what happens with a nap.
I was thinking, like, is there any evolutionary perspective behind the afternoon nap? How it evolved?
I'm not entirely sure we know how it evolved, but it is the natural sleep drive. So, perhaps in some parts of the world, maybe it evolved because it's when the sun is at its hottest and it's time to kind of, wind down a bit, and it encourages you to get out of the heat of the sun. But that's not always the case. I'm not sure I know the answer to that.
So to say, like, overall, studies show that people who sleep like too much or too little may have like poor health or like shorter lifespan. And you mentioned this also. What people need is to get like right quantity and quality of rest. My question is, how can we kind of balance, like find this balance in our life? And could you tell us your personal, social, or emotional, like daily rituals?
Yeah, well, I prioritize sleep. I live a very simple life. People might not believe that, but my life is very simple, and there's just a few kind of must-haves, and sleep for me has always been a priority. I was brought up in a family where sleep was a priority as well. My mother really likes sleep. My sister likes sleep. I just have always prioritized it. and understood its value, and have never ever enjoyed at all the feeling I get if I'm sleep deprived. I don't like feeling emotionally dysregulated. I don't like feeling grumpy. It doesn't suit me personally. So I prioritize a couple of things in the day. I prioritize sleep, and I try and prioritize exercise out in nature. And mostly exercise for me either means swimming in the ocean, because I live in Australia, so it's really easy. It's just out the window, or walking in the bush. And again, I'm surrounded by bush, and I go out for a walk with my dog most days. And I try and do that. I used to always do it early in the morning, but at the moment I'm sort of doing it later in the afternoon, because that just kind of suits my family's routine. I go to bed early most nights at about 8 or 9. My kids go to bed about 9, and I usually go to bed about in the same time that they do. My husband stays up a bit later than me watching Netflix, and that's fine. I love reading. I always read for about, I say I go to bed at 9. I usually read for 3/4 of an hour before I go to sleep. I'm usually asleep by 10. And as I say, I wake naturally when the sun comes up, and I sleep with my curtains open and I see the sunrise. The only morning routine I have is a coffee, black coffee in the morning. Sometimes my husband brings that to me in bed. Sometimes I get up and make it. This morning I got up just before 6, made a coffee, watched the sunrise and did some work. Other times, I might lie in bed and listen to a podcast, get up when the kids are getting ready for school and make them breakfast. The only regularity in my morning routine is I wake when the sun comes up and I have coffee at some point early in that process. And then I try and and I know cognitively that my best thinking time is in that first half of the day. And I get my best deep thinking and work done within my first sort of about 3 hours of the day. So sometimes I start before my kids go to school, or my kids have gone to school, and then I always set aside that first part of the morning, particularly on Mondays and Tuesdays, for deep work, for thinking, for just no distractions. That's when I do my thinking, my kind of planning, my content development, putting together teaching programs. That's especially Mondays and Tuesdays. I schedule phone calls, I schedule answering emails, meetings for the early afternoon. And then usually I very rarely schedule anything for after 2 in the afternoon, unless I absolutely have to do that. I would rather schedule something for 5 a.m. for a Zoom call than after 2 in the afternoon. And then the afternoons are free for me to run around after my boys, hang out with the dog, cook a lovely meal. I really enjoy cooking, have my walk, have my swim. And then I wind down in the evenings. As I say, I very rarely do much work after 2 in the afternoon. And I listen to a lot of podcasts. I get a lot of my information and entertainment via podcasts, and I'll be listening to them all afternoon when I'm busy doing things. So my life is very simple, not crazy busy, it's not as social as I would like, but whose lives are during a pandemic. But I do try and prioritize time with friends. If there's an invite to go somewhere and do something, I'll always say yes.
And it sounded simple, but it's kind of what you said. Everything you mentioned is kind of precious, like spending time and separating work time and family time. To overall sum up what we've talked during this podcast, how we eat, move, sleep, if we nap, how we form relationships and find meaning in everyday life. It is connected to our brain and how our brains are shaped, think and age. And right now, when this podcast is going to be posted on our social media, it's going to be afternoon nap time in Georgia. And what would you say to the Georgian people, like how we can nurture a healthy brain for life, and like kind of put a little bit of nap in it?
Yeah, for sure. I think people need to honor their biology, remember the fact that we are simply animals who evolved on planet Earth along with every other part of nature. We are part of nature, and to honor that and to ensure a longer, healthier life and a healthier brain and mind, prioritize sleep. Sleep's the foundation of everything else. Sleep will be the foundation of being able to exercise and connect and choose good food to eat and to, nurture other people. Prioritize sleep. Go to bed earlier. It's as simple as that.
Thank you, Sarah. To give it like a kind of final words, like for me, life is measured by this kind of mindful moments, I would say. And I would like to stay for a while in this moment and appreciate our meeting. And as I remember, there's kind of quote that life is measured not by the number of breaths we take, but by the moments that takes our breath away. So, and today I think this interview was one of those breathtaking moments for me, and thank you for that. And
that's beautiful. Thank you.
And keep inspiring people.
Yeah, I will. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to chat about my favorite thing, sleep.